Dune wasn't just a science fiction epic, it was obsession made manifest, a film that turned Frank Herbert's impossible novel into David Lynch's fevered nightmare. But behind the sandworms and space politics, nothing flowed smoothly. The script was longer than most novels. Lynch lost creative control to studio executives, and the final cut was assembled by people who didn't understand the source material. These are 15 weird facts about Dune. 1. Every major director in Hollywood passed on it before Lynch. Dune was Hollywood's most notorious, unmakeable project. Ridley Scott spent 2 years developing it before walking away, calling it too complex for cinema. George Lucas considered it but chose Star Wars instead. Steven Spielberg was offered the project multiple times and declined each one. The book had defeated seasoned filmmakers for over a decade. Its intricate politics, mystical elements, and massive scope seemed impossible to compress into a single film. Producers Dino De Laurentiis approached dozens of A-list directors, all of whom recognized the source material's brilliance, but couldn't solve its adaptation problems. When Lynch finally accepted, industry insiders predicted disaster. He was known for surreal art films like Eraserhead, not big-budget spectacles. The project that every established sci-fi director avoided became the responsibility of cinema's strangest visionary. Sometimes the most challenging projects find their way to the only filmmaker crazy enough to attempt them. 2. Alejandro Jodorowsky's version would have been 14 hours long years before Lynch. Surrealist filmmaker Jodorowsky spent 4 years developing the most ambitious film adaptation ever conceived. His Dune would have featured Salvador Dali as the Emperor, paid $100,000 per minute of screen time, Orson Welles as Baron Harkonnen, and Mick Jagger as Feyd-Rautha. The script was 3,000 pages long, bound in leather volumes with hundreds of concept drawings by legendary artist Moebius. Jodorowsky planned to cast his own son as Paul Atreides and put him through 2 years of martial arts and spiritual training. The budget would have exceeded $15 million in 1970s money, astronomical for the time. Pink Floyd and Magma were commissioned to create the soundtrack, while H.R. Giger designed the Harkonnen homeworld years before creating the alien xenomorph. 3. Lynch wrote a script that was longer than most novels. Lynch's original screenplay was over 300 pages, typically enough material for a 6-hour film. He had absorbed Herbert's dense novel so completely that his first draft attempted to include every major subplot, character, and philosophical concept from the source material. The script contained elaborate internal monologues, extensive world-building exposition, and detailed explanations of Dune's complex political systems. Studio executives were horrified by its length but impressed by Lynch's comprehensive understanding of Herbert's universe. Lynch spent months cutting scenes, combining characters, and condensing plot lines, but even his shortened version was too long for commercial release. The cast underwent military-style training. Kyle MacLachlan and the other actors portraying warriors underwent weeks of intensive combat training that resembled military boot camp more than typical Hollywood preparation. Knife fighting instructors taught them authentic blade techniques, while martial arts choreographers developed the distinctive fighting styles of different Dune factions. The training was particularly brutal for scenes involving the deadly Gom Jabbar test and hand-to-hand combat sequences. MacLachlan, making his film debut, was pushed through physical conditioning that left him genuinely exhausted and mentally focused in ways that enhanced his portrayal of Paul's transformation from boy to leader. The combat training included not just choreographed movie fighting, but actual martial arts discipline that changed how the actors carried themselves throughout filming. Lynch believed that authentic physical preparation would translate into more convincing performances, and the intensive training created genuine camaraderie among cast members that reflected their characters' brotherhood bonds. The sandworms were practical puppets, operated by dozens of people. The massive sandworms that became Dune's most memorable creatures were entirely practical effects requiring teams of puppeteers working in perfect coordination. The largest worm model was over 40 feet long and weighed several tons, operated by hydraulics and cable systems that needed dozens of technicians to control its movements. Each worm's mouth contained hundreds of individually crafted teeth, and the internal gullet was detailed enough to be convincing in extreme close-ups. The creature's distinctive roaring sounds were created by combining elephant calls, whale songs, and modified industrial noise. Building and operating the sandworms consumed a significant portion of the film's budget, but they achieved a tactile reality that computer graphics of the era couldn't match. The puppeteers had to rehearse complex movements for weeks to make the creatures feel alive rather than mechanical. These magnificent practical effects became the film's most praised technical achievement, proving that sometimes the most convincing monsters are the ones built by human hands rather than generated by computers. 6. Sting spent months learning swordsmanship for one scene. Sting, cast as the sadistic Fade Routha, dedicated himself to mastering medieval sword techniques for his climactic duel with Paul Atreides. He trained with historical combat experts, studying authentic European fighting styles that would make his character's movements believable and dangerous. The preparation was particularly challenging because Fade's fighting style had to reflect both aristocratic training and psychopathic cruelty. Sting worked with choreographers to develop signature moves that expressed his character's personality through combat techniques. The actor took the training so seriously that he continued practicing between takes, maintaining his skills throughout the lengthy production schedule. His dedication paid off in a duel sequence that felt genuinely threatening, rather than obviously choreographed. 7. The studio added narration against Lynch's wishes. Lynch intended Dune to be a visual and auditory experience that trusted audiences to understand complex concepts through context and atmosphere. But studio executives panicked about the story's complexity, demanding extensive voiceover narration to explain plot points and character motivations. Lynch fought against this decision, arguing that narration would destroy the film's mystical ambiance and treat audiences like children. When he refused to write the narration himself, the studio hired other writers to create explanatory voiceovers that Lynch considered simplistic and insulting. The added narration fundamentally changed the film's pacing and tone, turning Lynch's impressionistic epic into something more conventionally accessible but less artistically coherent. 8. Patrick Stewart insisted on playing Gurney Halleck as a warrior poet. Stewart, primarily known for classical theater, brought Shakespearean gravity to the role of Duncan Idaho's weapons master and troubadour. He insisted that Gurney be portrayed as more than a simple soldier, a cultured warrior who balanced violence with artistic sensitivity. Stewart worked with Lynch to develop scenes showing Gurney's musical abilities and his role as Paul's combat instructor and cultural mentor. The actor drew from his theater background to create a character who could deliver exposition about fighting techniques with the same passion as philosophical discussions. Stewart's interpretation influenced how other characters related to Gurney, making him a bridge between the film's political intrigue and its deeper themes about leadership and sacrifice. His performance demonstrated that even supporting characters in epic films could carry complex internal lives that enriched the overall narrative. 9. The sound design required inventing new audio technologies. Lynch and sound designer Alan Splett created audio landscapes that had never been attempted in cinema, requiring custom equipment and innovative recording techniques. The Weirding way, combat sounds were created by layering human voices with industrial noise and animal calls, processed through experimental electronic filters. The sandworm vocalizations combined organic and mechanical elements to suggest creatures that were both living and geological. Lynch wanted every sound to feel otherworldly but emotionally comprehensible, leading to months of experimentation with unconventional recording methods. The film's distinctive audio signature came from treating sound as sculpture, building complex layers that supported the visual imagery while creating their own emotional effects. Splett and Lynch recorded everything from whispering voices to massive machinery, then manipulated these sounds until they became alien but recognizable. 10. Max von Sydow's performance was mostly improvised. Von Sydow, playing the imperial ecologist Dr. Kynes, approached his role by largely ignoring the script and improvising dialogue based on his understanding of Herbert's character. Lynch encouraged this approach, recognizing that von Sydow's classical training and natural authority could enhance scenes through spontaneous interpretation. The actor studied the novel extensively, developing his own sense of Kynes' motivations and speaking patterns that felt more authentic than scripted dialogue. Many of his most memorable lines were created on set through collaboration with Lynch and other actors, resulting in performances that felt lived in rather than written. Von Sydow's improvisational approach influenced other cast members, creating a more organic ensemble dynamic that enhanced the film's sense of lived-in political complexity. 11. The costumes required months of handcrafting. Costume designer Bob Ringwood spent over a year creating the elaborate outfits that defined each faction's visual identity. The still suits worn by desert dwellers were constructed as functional garments with working water recycling systems that actually collected and filtered moisture. Guild Navigator costumes required special effects integration, with built-in mechanisms for the mutation sequences that transformed actors into alien beings. Each major house had distinctive armor, robes, and accessories that reflected their political status and cultural traditions. The imperial court costumes incorporated real metalwork, hand-stitched embroidery, and custom jewelry that cost more than most films' entire wardrobe budgets. Ringwood studied historical armor and ceremonial dress from multiple cultures, combining elements to create costumes that felt both futuristic and timeless. 12. The giant sets were built in multiple countries. Production required constructing massive sets across Mexico, England, and other locations to accommodate the story's epic scope. The Atreides Palace on Caladan was built as a practical location large enough for elaborate court scenes and intimate family moments. The Harkonnen industrial complex required actual factory spaces modified with futuristic machinery and torture devices that reflected the family's sadistic nature. Lynch insisted on practical locations that actors could inhabit completely, believing that authentic environments would improve performances and visual authenticity. The scale of construction rivaled major architectural projects, with some sets taking months to build and requiring specialized engineering to support camera equipment and special effects apparatus. Each location was designed to reflect specific cultural and political themes from Herbert's novel, making the environments active participants in storytelling rather than simple backdrops. 13. Lynch lost Final Cut during post-production. Despite being hired as writer-director, Lynch discovered that studio executives were re-editing his footage without consultation, adding scenes he hadn't shot and removing sequences he considered essential. The final theatrical version represented studio compromise rather than Lynch's intended artistic vision, leading him to disown the film and remove his name from later television versions. Lynch had shot enough material for a much longer cut that would have better served Herbert's complex narrative, but studio demands for commercial pacing eliminated crucial character development and world-building sequences. The editing conflicts became so severe that Lynch stopped attending post-production sessions, leaving others to complete a film that no longer reflected his creative intentions. 14. The film's failure led to Lynch's greatest successes. Dune's commercial and critical disappointment devastated Lynch personally, but ultimately freed him to pursue more personal projects that established his lasting artistic reputation. The experience taught him the importance of creative control and led directly to his insistence on independence for future films. Lynch used lessons learned from Dune's production challenges to develop the innovative approaches that made Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, and Mulholland Drive possible. The failure also attracted a cult following that appreciated Lynch's visual style and atmospheric storytelling, even in compromised form. Many fans discovered Lynch through Dune and followed his career as he developed his distinctive cinematic voice. The film's problems became case studies in film schools and industry discussions about the balance between artistic vision and commercial viability. 15th. It became a cult classic. Despite universal initial rejection, critics and audiences initially dismissed Dune as an incomprehensible mess that failed both as entertainment and adaptation. But over decades, the film developed a devoted following that appreciated Lynch's visual imagination and atmospheric world-building, even when the narrative structure remained problematic. Science fiction fans began recognizing innovative design elements and sound work that influenced countless later films. The movie's reputation improved as viewers approached it as a Lynch film rather than a faithful Herbert adaptation, allowing appreciation of its surreal imagery and distinctive tone. Home video releases allowed audiences to study the film's complex details and visual storytelling techniques that were overwhelming in theatrical presentation. Dune remains one of cinema's most fascinating failures, a film that attempted the impossible and achieved something unique even in defeat. Drop a comment below. What legendary film should we dive into next? Because in a universe full of adaptations, some visions refuse to be tamed.